Did you work it out? Okay. Okay, I think everybody and everything is in place. So, good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk about the Kansas Department of Labor. I want to first walk through where we are and then where we intend to go. I want to cover the challenges with our unemployment insurance system, the progress the agency has made to address these challenges, and the actions to strengthen our system today and to better equip the agency to handle future crises. I've also asked our new Director, or Department of Labor Acting Secretary, Amber Shultz, to join me today. I want to formally introduce her to Kansans and have her provide her analysis of where the agency is right now and where she sees it going. But before we get to Secretary Shultz, I'm first going to speak to every Kansan who has encountered problems trying to access our unemployment benefit system. You know, when the pandemic began in March, unemployment was at an all-time low in Kansas. Coincidentally, the staffing at the Department of Labor was also at an all-time low. At that time, the agency's top priority was its work on modernizing our 44-year-old IT system. And just for a reference point, Jimmy Carter was sworn in as governor in 1977. I know lots of you are too young to even remember Jimmy Carter. And for those of you who are a little older, it's also the exact same year that Elvis Presley died. So with that in mind, I'll move on. Our priority had to drastically change when COVID-19 hit. It started to wreak havoc, obviously, with the health of Kansans, but also with our economy. Labor's strategy had to shift from modernization to fixing it to stabilization, getting checks out the door to Kansans who had lost their jobs as quickly as possible. We needed to respond, process, and deliver thousands of claims and answer hundreds of thousands of calls every single day. And then there were other external hurdles, like the ever-changing federal unemployment programs added on top of our own state program. Prior to March, KDOL was responsible for administering one program, our unemployment program. To respond to COVID, the federal government created another three. Trying to plan for when the federal government was going to act and what the action would require of us to administer those programs was really an incredibly difficult thing to do. The volume of claims and calls and the added federal program systems just overwhelmed our entire IT system. As you know, the system uses that antiquated coding language, and aligning our system with every new federal program that came down was sort of like translating hieroglyphics into English, and then we had to do it 3 different times. And then there are the root causes that got us in the situation in the first place. Over the last decade, the Kansas Department of Labor has been underfunded and undersupported. This was by design. There was a desire to reduce the number of unemployment benefits that would actually be paid out. The modernization process, which had begun in 2009, was abruptly ended by the Brownback-Collier administration in 2011, a prelude to other devastating cuts that would follow to fill the craters created by that tax experiment of 2012. Then, last May, legislators stopped my administration's effort to reform a punitive fraud law, a law that caused additional hardship for thousands of Kansans already rocked by the pandemic. And just last week, during the pandemic, some in the legislature proposed legislation that would further limit the number of unemployment insurance benefit weeks available to Kansans. So that's what we're up against. A once-in-a-century crisis, curveballs from our federal partners instead of coordination and help, Stone Age computer technology, and lawmakers who, in spite of everything Kansans have gone through this past year, want to further limit our ability to help people. Despite these barriers, KDOL has gone after and acted on the short-term fixes that are achievable. KDOL staff has ramped up the speed they're getting benefits to Kansans. They've gotten nearly 4 million weekly claims processed and sent out more than $2.5 billion. They scaled up their call center staff from 20 to over 450 people, and they're in the process now of hiring another 100 temporary staff to assist more people more quickly. Our patched together systems have also been under constant attack by fraudsters. It's been a problem for individuals, businesses, and the agency. And it's not a problem unique to Kansas. Estimates suggest unemployment fraud during the pandemic cost taxpayers across the United States nearly $360 billion. Fortunately, over the last 3 weeks, KDOL's new identity verification system has stopped nearly 5 million bot attacks or fraudulent attempts to log into the system. Despite all these attacks, KDOL has stopped over 500,000 fraudulent claims that could have cost more than $22 billion. And last week, the agency, after weeks of creating a new fix, paid out benefits from the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program. That's the federal program that extends benefits, the number of weeks of benefits that someone can get. And that went out to nearly 5,000 claimants. The extensions of PUIC and PUA, and that's the unemployment for gig workers, are two of the federal programs that require an extraordinary amount of coding and testing before you can implement. Getting these two up and running will cover the vast majority of claimants who have been experiencing ongoing issues for the last 2 months. While it's welcome news that both federal programs are paying out with the extensions that were enacted in December, ensuring timely payments can only come with a new, modern system. One that will allow us to address today's problems and ensure the next time we have a once-in-a-century crisis that the state is prepared. That kind of project is not as simple as going to the Apple store and buying a new laptop. It's a multi-year process that we're working to speed up. We expect to put the system out for bid by summer and begin work on it by the end of the year. This year, my proposed budget invests over $37 million to restart the modernization process we had begun in 2019 before the pandemic hit. These efforts will be fast-tracked under Secretary Shultz's leadership. We urge the Kansas Senate to act quickly to confirm Secretary Shultz so she can focus all her energy on fixing what's wrong at labor and provide the employees at labor with the steady leadership they need. Secretary Shultz is an IT expert with 25 years of experience in technology and innovation. She is the right person at the right time to lead the Department of Labor. But she can't do it alone. She will need collaboration across state and federal government, including my office and the legislature. That's why I wrote a letter signed by governors in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and delivered to U.S. Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. Kansas is just one of 30 states with outdated systems that have slowed responses to unemployment insurance claimants and left our folks vulnerable to fraud. My requests to Congress were that the next stimulus package include funds for states to fast-track IT modernization, a permanent source of funding to ensure that states can react proactively to the next crisis, and solvency relief for the state's unemployment trust fund. It is imperative that states receive the support and receive it soon. I have asked Kansas legislative leaders to sign on to a similar letter to our federal delegation. Given everything that we've heard over the last few weeks, I had hoped this Kansas letter would have broad bipartisan support. Unfortunately, none of the Republican leaders responded to my request to sign on. It's disappointing, but it won't stop us in our work to fix the systemic issues that got us into this mess. And for that reason, I'm asking that any legislation seeking to make changes at KDOL include at least provisions that keep our trust fund strong. I want appropriations for IT modernization, and I want reform of the 5-year disqualification penalty for claims determined to be fraudulent. Right now, we need to support our unemployed Kansans in every way possible. We cannot make it more difficult for them to access the benefits they need to keep a roof over their head, their lights on, and feed their families. Before I turn it over, I want to reiterate to the Kansans who have struggled to receive benefits. I know the events of this past year have seemed overwhelming, frustrating, and downright unfair. I hear you, and I'm doing everything in my power to fix things now and ensure that never again do Kansans experience these obstacles to help. While I'm confident that we have addressed many of the immediate issues, we cannot lose sight of what happens when we do not maintain and modernize our infrastructure. Today we're talking about IT systems, but there are plenty of tangible examples of what happens when we don't fund essential government services. Let's think back to Hurricane Katrina. Years of neglect and lack of investment in infrastructure left levees and flood walls in New Orleans vulnerable. More than 50 levees broke when Katrina hit, leaving 80% of New Orleans underwater and nearly 2,000 people dead. In 2007, a design error in a bridge in Minneapolis could have been spotted if bridge improvement projects had been properly funded. Instead, the bridge collapsed and 13 people died. Last week, Texans were without power for days. Pipes burst, destroying homes and businesses. 32 people died, including an 11-year-old boy who froze to death in his bed. Why? There are a myriad of reasons, but not weatherizing the grid played a huge role. Our state and our nation must learn from these tragedies. We must invest in core services, our safety nets, to support our communities and our families in time of need. And it's not just the Department of Labor. Our COVID recovery strategy has to include investments in our schools, our healthcare, our roads, our broadband, and our economy. Recovery won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, and it won't be cheap. But it will make Kansas stronger, healthier, and better prepared to weather the storms of the future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Acting Secretary Shultz, who will bring a different perspective that comes with the benefit of a fresh set of eyes, her expertise, and her wealth of experience. Secretary.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. Excuse me. I'm Acting Secretary Amber Shultz, and today I'm going to provide you an update on the Department of Labor's modernization efforts. But before I go into that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a technology professional for 25 years, the majority of that as a public servant. I understand the importance of that confluence between creating citizen services, being a good steward of tax dollars, and assuring the programs that we invest in have viable foundations and realistic visions. So to better understand a little bit about what's ahead of us, I think it's important to explain how we got here. So as we all know, as Governor Kelly mentioned, the primary system for unemployment insurance was built in the 1970s, and to her point, I was still in diapers when that system came online. In the early 2000s, under Governor Sebelius and Parkinson, and working with the legislature, they secured $47 million in funding to modernize that antiquated system. Several key components of the system were modernized, following phased detailed designs of functionality requirements and re-engineering. But just as the agency started to check off some of their key component successes, the Brownback administration abruptly ended the modernization project in 2011. Knowing the risks to our outdated system, that posed by the agency's ability to perform our core services, Governor Kelly tasked leadership to develop a new modernization plan after taking office in 2019. Our agency met with states who had modernized to discuss best practices and lessons learned from their modernization efforts. Unfortunately, as the governor alluded to, when the pandemic struck, modernization was put on hold and we pivoted to focus our resources to stabilizing the current system. Since then, Governor Kelly has continued to support the agency's efforts to modernize and shares our goal of moving forward aggressively now that the systems have been largely stabilized. So to date, we have achieved several key milestones working with our partners in the Office of Information Technology Services. Our state has a robust technology project management process which assures that our initiative aligns with proper project management and technology protocols. My first priority for modernization will be to complete the feasibility study and functionality requirements. We hope to issue a request for proposals soon, followed by a project kickoff after we sign a contract. So historically, these modernization projects take 3 to 5 years, but here in Kansas, we are taking every possible avenue to reduce that timeline as much as feasible while still delivering the type of system that Kansas has deserved. In closing, I want to reiterate the governor's message to Kansans who have experienced frustration and delays in receiving government benefits. As a mother and a fellow Kansan, I know some of you watching today have gone through immeasurable hardships over this past year. There's still a lot of work to be done. But if there is a silver lining, these 2 federal programs have begun to pay our benefits. The new security upgrade has also significantly reduced our burden to catch fraud attempts. And as we continue to scale up our staff, we'll be able to spend less time navigating on those issues and more time getting benefits for Kansans who need them. Thank you.
Governor, a question that I don't know that I've asked it this way, but I'm curious if you have any kind of estimate as to how much in fraudulent unemployment payments the state has actually paid out. Just that, you can round it to the nearest million anymore.
Or the nearest 10 million or whatever. We are actually still sort of compiling the data and getting the facts so that when we do give you a number, it's based on those 2 things. The numbers that have been bandied about out there, the 700 million or whatever, I don't know what that's based on, not any of the facts that we're gathering. And so I'm not going to give you a number now. We're getting very close. We've been working on this for a while. And as soon as we know what that number is, we'll let you know.
Well, Governor, you said that the new login system has stopped. It's over 500 million fraudulent login attempts, but then you gave a number of potential benefits claims that have been blocked. You said 22 billion? Or
Yeah, no, if those 500,000 had been paid out, then we're talking 22 billion.
I mean, I understand that that's login attempts, not actual fraudulent claims, but I mean, even if we're talking a fraction of those having been successful before you put in the new portal, I mean, isn't it safe to say we're talking into the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars?
Like I said, I'm not going to give you a number now. I'm not even going to give you a range, other than I can tell you it's likely very much less than the 700 million. But beyond that, I really can't until we pull all the numbers together and we can add and subtract, and then we'll give you the data.
This might be a better question for the Secretary, but how many Kansans right now are not up to date on their unemployment payments?
Do you have that?
Meaning how many have not received to current date?
So of those Kansans that are eligible for unemployment payments, the regular unemployment program, there is no backlog. Deputy Secretary Peter Brady's here with me, and just so I'm make sure I have my facts and figures straight, for the PUA program, which is the gig workers, I think that there's our backlog is calculated after 21 days, and I believe that there's about 12,000 Kansans still in that backlog.
And then what about the call center? Just last week we had people calling in at Wichita that spent 10 hours that day, called 150, 200 times, no luck. What's being done? When can they expect that to improve?
Certainly, I absolutely understand their frustration not being able to get in. So I know that former Acting Secretary Wright had given some Tips and tricks on not calling in on Mondays. It seems to be our busiest day, so call throughout the rest of the week. The one thing that we are doing is we're adding more resources to our customer service, the phone lines. Unfortunately, it's not just pulling it off the shelf and plugging people into the wall. It takes weeks of training to get these people in. So we've had several waves of training, and as the governor mentioned, we started out at 20, and now we're at about 450.
Secretary Shultz, I'm sorry, I just wanted to tag on to the CSR question, because we also get a lot of feedback from people who are experiencing rather unusual behavior from CSRs, people eating in the background, talking to people on the line. Sometimes they hang up on them purposely. It's rather strange. So I wanted to know, what is the supervision process for these CSRs? What specific type of training are they receiving before they are brought in as customer service representatives?
All right, I'll probably let Deputy Secretary Brady take that one.
Actually, you don't mind, I'm going to take that. Recognize there are really two different. We have the CSRs, who are customer service reps, who are employed by the Department of Labor. And we've increased. I mean, I think we started out when the pandemic hit, we had 20 of them, and now we have far more than that. But what we've also done is we have brought in some support services through a contract agency, and they're the ones who bring those other folks in. They, though, do get the same, it's not the same total training that somebody we hired would get, because that needs to be much more extensive because they'll have other tasks to do. But the training for the contract reps, thoroughly goes through what it is they need to do to respond to these calls. And if a response to the call is beyond their function, then they're to pass it on to somebody within the agency, and they can take it.
Governor, I'm struck by the fact that the state put somewhere around $50 million into the system during the Sebelius Parkinson era, and it's not in better shape than it is. I mean, how the hell do you spend $50 million on a computer modernization and not get all the way there?
Well, John, the $50 million was not spent. The Sebelius and then the Parkinson administration began the process of modernization, and as the Secretary said, they were able to get a few things done. Can you imagine if those hadn't been done? This would have been an even worse disaster. So there was some work that progressed, but then almost immediately upon taking office, the Secretary of Labor just ceased the modernization, just one day, no more. That was it. And so the money was not spent to upgrade. We are asking for the $37.5 million in this year's budget. We're asking the feds to provide more so that we can go forward with the modernization. But then we also know, you don't just build these things and then let them go. You've got to maintain and upgrade on a regular basis, and so that's what we need the federal government to do, is to give us the funding into our unemployment systems in this state and every other state so that we don't run into this ever again.
Governor, can we get the reaction on the hunger strike that has happened outside the Kansas Department of Labor in protest?
Well, you know that I can't talk about, individual legally. I can't talk about them. The Secretary can't talk about individual claimants and their issues. What I can tell you sort of globally is that as these payments from the federal government are paid out, I think we got the nearly 5,000 out Friday, and more to come the end of this week, and then we should finish that up sometime, I believe, next week, and then the issue will be resolved. At least one of the issues will be resolved. So that's what I can tell you, is that it's in process.
Regarding your letter to Washington, you asked for funding for states to be able to fast track the modernization of their systems. I can already tell you the biggest question here, about going on a year into this pandemic. Why is this letter being sent now? Have there been previous requests?
No, we have first of all, you know, we haven't had the bandwidth to deal with modernization. You know, we have, you know, just been dealing with the deluge of daily work, you know, processing the claims, getting the checks out. So, you know, it was the same reason we had to stop the process that we had started in 2019. We just really didn't have the bandwidth, and adding more people to the call center wasn't going to increase our bandwidth. So, but now, as you know, as we sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel on this pandemic, you know, we've got the vaccines coming in, we're getting people vaccinated. We fully expect that fewer and fewer people will be filing unemployment claims because businesses will reopen. People will have their kids back in school. Now they can work instead of staying home to take care of their kids. So I fully expect that we will see an influx into the workforce, a decrease in the number of unemployment claims that we're having to process every day. And that will then give us the bandwidth to, you know, proceed with the modernization. And so that's why we need the money. Also, a lot of that money we're really asking to be ongoing so that we can do what I just talked about, you know, and that's, you know, maintain and upgrade, you know, on a yearly or semi-annual basis as we need to, rather than put it all in, start it, and then never do anything to maintain it.
Governor, to get back to what happened and why this project was stopped, I have heard from some Republicans that at the time they didn't believe that the money was being, for the modernization project was being particularly well spent, that was characterized to me as sort of profligate spending without much. That's not the way they put it, but that basically the money was being wasted. What would you say to that?
Well, what I remember in 2011 was just the off switch being flipped on and the project stopped. So, you know, that's what I remember. I believe that it was a directive that they were not to go forward with the modernization. And my understanding was because it did cost money, there was money that hadn't been spent. They didn't want to spend it because they were sort of setting the table in 2011 for the tax cuts in 2012, which reduced spending all across the state in every aspect, whether you're talking schools or roads or anything else. And I think the modernization project at that point was just a victim of that desire.
Last question?
Secretary, as far as those roughly 12,000 you said PUA recipients that still not been paid, any timeline whatsoever on when they can potentially expect payment?
So regarding those PUA recipients, they're all going through they're at one stage of the process or the other, primarily adjudications or some other issue that we'll have to be looking into. There's just a little bit of a backlog because this was a brand new federal program. It's not something that was on, you know, to be put on top of our regular unemployment program like the other benefit programs were.
Is there any
Days, weeks, months?
Unfortunately, I can't give you an answer on that.
Is there any kind of backlog in the regular unemployment?
No,
program?
regular unemployment is up to date.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.